Orange Chrysanthemums by Whitney Harper. Charles grunted as he heaved himself up from his chair. Grabbing his cracked brown leather suitcase from the top of his desk, he turned to leave, but ended up smacking his pencil cup and sent it flying through the air. It crashed against the water cooler, which responded with a loud glug. You could hear all the typing fingers in the office pause for a second, hovering above their keyboards, but only for a moment as the hollow hum returned. Josh, one of the younger salesmen with a cubicle also next to the water cooler, poked his head out from around the corner and jumped up to help when he saw what had happened.
"Hey there, Charles. Let me help you with that."
Thanks, Josh.
I appreciate that,"
Charles said.
"Oh, sure. We all have those days, you know."
Charles smiled as he bent down to clean up the mess. He was actually having a great day. May 5th. It was his and his dear Evelyn's 57th anniversary tomorrow, he thought as he grabbed at the pencils all over the floor. He couldn't wait to get out of there to see her. They were only 18 when they got married, high school sweethearts. But those were different times. Boy, did they love each other, though. He met her in grade school, and he was hooked from the start. She had skinny blonde curls her mama would pull up in pigtails and tie with little pink ribbons. She didn't like him hanging around too much at first, but then she started letting him walk her home from school, since he only lived a street over. He used to carry her books while she would tell him all about her day. Evelyn could talk. That girl never ran out of words, but he didn't mind. He wasn't too chatty himself, and he liked the sound of her voice.
"Well, I can't complain,"
Charles said.
"It's my anniversary tomorrow, did you know that? 57 years.
He whistled as he stood up straight and stretched his back. Josh set the pencil cup back on the desk and turned around with that worried look in his eye. Charles got that look from everyone around here. He was the old fart in the office, and he knew it. He actually retired years ago, but the company kept him on to come in and help run some numbers every now and then. Evelyn told him it was good for him to keep his mind on work and stuff. Charles was actually quite the whiz kid back in the day. He was always good at numbers. Evelyn, on the other hand, hated math. Her mind was being too creative for numbers and all. That's what she always said, anyway. She loved music, and was one of the best dang piano players you'd ever hear. When they moved into their first little apartment after they got married, the piano took up half the living room. Charles's brother had to help him move it, and heck if he knew how they got that thing to fit through the front door. Oh, but it was worth it. Evelyn clung onto his neck and showered him with praises as they sat on the sofa that night admiring the old piano. Those were the only two things that they could smash into the room, the sofa and the piano, so there wasn't much else to look at. Josh, still wearing that worried look, never responded to Charles, just gave him a solid pat on the shoulder and thanked him again before slipping out. The early sun was casting a warm haze on everything. Charles could feel the Southern California heat coming up from the pavement as he started walking home. He only lived a couple blocks away, but the distance seemed to get longer each day he walked it. His hips started to hurt as he shuffled along, and he kept his gaze fixed on the ground so he wouldn't trip over the broken, uneven sidewalk. The chain-link fences cast shadows across the ground, and he noticed the little dandelions growing up through the crack in the cement. That's what he would do. He had been thinking about what he wanted to get Evelyn, and those little flowers gave him just the right idea. She always appreciated things with a sort of simple beauty, something like flowers. Yep, she would like that. A bus rumbled past and screeched to a stop about 10 feet in front of him. A couple of young kids holding their skateboards and laughing loudly jumbled into the bus, but Charles walked right past without turning his head. The bus driver used to always see him walking home and would stop to offer him a ride free of charge. Charles always said no, though, so she learned to stop asking. He hated the bus, and the walk was good for him. Finally, Charles got to the front door of his little home painted a dull yellow. Evelyn said it was a happy color. He set down his old suitcase and fumbled around for his keys in his suit pocket. That old tweed suit was brown too. only a couple shades lighter than his cracking leather suitcase. Both were a gift from his wife. He remembered the day when she gave them to him, when he got his first real job. "I think it looks professional," she had told him. "And handsome, too." She giggled when he scooped her up and twirled her around the room, dipping her down into a kiss before he headed off for work. Yep, Charles and Evelyn's love story sounded like a dream, but it was true, every word. They were star-crossed lovers, and while their life wasn't perfect, it was exactly what they wanted. Their little house sat in the shade of their neighbor's big magnolia trees, so Charles stepped into the nice, cool house. The sun was already close to going down, but the air was still hot outside. Charles slipped off his shoes by the door and shuffled into the kitchen, where he saw a note and half a grapefruit with a little sugar sprinkled on top sitting on the counter. The note said, "Dear Charlie, I headed out to grab a surprise for our anniversary tomorrow. I left you a snack, and dinner is in the cooler. Don't wait up for me, and don't worry. I'm meeting up with Catherine. All my love, Evelyn." Catherine was Evelyn's sister, and when those two got together, no one was able to get a word in. They talked so much that you had to wonder if either of them was actually listening to the other. Charles remembers when he and Evelyn had their third child, the first girl, and she was as perfect as they come. Catherine came and stayed in their cramped little house to help take care of the boys. She was the opposite of Evelyn in every way, with short dark hair and so tall her feet hung off the end of the sofa that she slept on while she stayed with them. And she was loud too. Neighbors 10 houses down could probably hear the woman cackle at her own jokes. Though Evelyn and her were as close as two sisters could be, and as Charles thought about it, he guessed there were a few similarities too. Besides the talking, both Evelyn and Catherine were some of the sweetest ladies around. They would give you their last dime if you said you needed it. He was grateful they had Catherine. Charles knew he would be lucky to see Evelyn before he fell asleep tonight. It worried him when they stayed out late like this, but he'd learned to stop bringing it up. Evelyn was sweet, but that gal also had a backbone. She didn't take nothing from no one, and would be the first to remind you that little ladies, as you put it, can take care of themselves. Thank you very much. Wondering what the surprise could be, Charles chuckled as he put down the note and picked up the bowl with the half grapefruit inside. It was his and Evelyn's favorite treat lately. He planted that grapefruit tree years ago, and during the winter and early months of the year, they always had more grapefruit than they knew what to do with. They would often eat a grapefruit every morning and night, splitting it to share, just as Evelyn had done. He grabbed a spoon from the cupboard and shuffled into the living room, where he'd made his way over to their old vinyl record player. Charles took pride in his record collection. It wasn't easy to keep that old player in shape, but it was one of his passions. Unlike Evelyn, Charles wasn't gifted in musical abilities, but that didn't mean he didn't have an ear for good music. That's why he loved listening to Evelyn play. Charles ran his fingers across a couple of forgotten records until he picked out his favorite, the one he always chose. It was My One and Only Love, performed by John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. Same song he and Evelyn had danced to at their wedding all those years ago. He plopped down into his lazy boy and was at first distracted again by wondering about this surprise Evelyn had for him. What could it be? Though, soon he settled down and remembered to listen to the soothing pops and static of the record player, still playing the long saxophone into their intro. Closing his eyes, he let his mind wander. Evelyn looked so incredible in her dress. It had short sleeves, and she wore long white gloves that reached up past her elbows. A few skinny blonde curls trickled down her elegant neck, and the rest of her hair was pulled into a loose bun. She hadn't worn a veil on their wedding day, and Charles remembered Evelyn's mama being so mad about that. Evelyn had told him that she didn't care. It was her wedding day, and she was going to wear what she wanted to. Instead, there were little white flowers intertwined into her curls. Charles swore they had stared into each other's eyes all night long, not bothering to notice anything else. He remembered feeling like his heart had burst from happiness when silent tears rolled down his cheeks, and he held her tight as they danced to their song. The touch of your hand is like heaven. heaven that I've never known. The blush on your cheek whenever I speak, tell us that you are my own. When Charles opened his eyes again, he realized he was actually crying, remembering that night. He wiped his eyes, feeling a little silly. He would say that night was the best night of his life, but that wasn't even true. Evelyn and him loved each other so much that their life had been filled with incredible moments, each one more deep and meaningful than the last. Charles loved Evelyn more now than he had ever before. Remembering the grapefruit he had sitting on his lap, Charles sat up and began to eat. Grapefruit was interesting. It could be so sour, so bitter. When you picked it at the right time, it was sweet and delicious. Especially when you sprinkled a little sugar on top, the way Evelyn always did. When he finished, he was full enough that he decided just to abandon completely the dinner left in the cooler. Evelyn was a woman with many talents, but cooking was not one of them. This was actually something else that her and Catherine also shared. When they were first married, Charles thought Evelyn just had to get in practice of making meals. But she never really grew out of that stage of burning everything that went into the oven. He remembered a time when Evelyn tried to surprise him for his birthday. Her surprises actually didn't turn out very well. She'd sent him out for a round of golf with his brother, and he came to a fire truck parked outside of their house and black smoke billowing from their kitchen window. She had planned on making a special cake as a treat. Pineapple upside down cake, a recipe her mama had clipped out of a magazine years before. Evelyn had got so distracted trying to decorate the house before he got home that she nearly burned the house down. Evelyn had been hysterical and close to tears when Charles and his brother pulled up. But now they were both in tears, laughing so hard at the situation. The wallpaper around the oven was just a little blackened from the smoke, and it stayed that way for quite a while until they had scraped enough money to fix it. Sitting in his chair, Charles looked around the room. The record had ended, but was left still silently spinning over in the corner. His gaze wandered over to the same old piano Evelyn loved so much. The room wasn't even as small as their first apartment, but this home wasn't very big either, especially not when they were raising 5 kids in it. But he and Evelyn had loved it from the start. She had called it quaint and said it was exactly what she'd wanted. Charles had thought that she was making him feel better because it was all he could provide. But throughout the years, she had poured her heart and soul into the life that they lived in within these walls. Charles had planted the grapefruit tree upon her request, and she'd sewn cheerful colored curtains for every room. To their kids, it had been a magical place, somewhere that felt safe from the harsh realities of the outside world. Everything now seemed to be filled with her love. He fell asleep like that, sitting in his chair surrounded by Evelyn's love. Charles suddenly startled awake by the look of the dull, gray, misty morning light seeping through the windows. He'd been asleep for a while. He realized there was an old canary-colored afghan Evelyn had crocheted draped over him. He began pulling himself out of the chair, feeling his muscles ache from sitting at the same position for so long. He shifted with a groan as he stretched them out, not wanting to wake Evelyn, who must have been asleep just down the hall in their bedroom. He dragged himself into the kitchen to see the time. 5:47 a.m. Evelyn would still be asleep for a little over an hour or so. He again wondered what that surprise could have been that Evelyn had been out so late for last night. He also wondered how he didn't hear those two giggling from down the block even before Evelyn got in. Suddenly worried, he couldn't remember if he'd locked the door or not the night before, but then relaxed, recalling that either way, Catherine had a key so that they could have easily gotten in. Charles, still in his suit, with sleep in his eyes, remembered that he had wanted to surprise his sweetheart too. Flowers. He had wanted to get Evelyn flowers. Just then his stomach grumbled loudly, reminding him that he needed some breakfast if he planned on walking all the way to the flower shop and back this morning. He wandered over to the sliding glass door that led into their slight backyard. Opening the door, the brisk, misty air hit him and made him suck in a breath. He quickly made his way to the tree and picked a fresh grapefruit. Back inside, he silently slid the door closed, shutting out the chill. He prepared the grapefruit in the usual way, cutting it in half, sprinkling a little sugar on top, just the way Evelyn likes it, and eating one half while putting the other half in a bowl for Evelyn. He did that every morning since he was usually the first one up. After a quick cleanup, Charles went up to the front door and put his shoes back on. He thought about the flowers that he was going to get. Orange chrysanthemums is what he decided on. Evelyn always liked those cheerful colors, and Charles remembered how much she loved what she called a forgotten flower. He smiled about the thought of surprising her, then remembered. He had his own surprise to wonder about as he opened the front door, as quietly as he could, and slipped out. It was already warmer outside, with the sun coming up, and starting to cast rays of golden light over the roof of his house into the neighbor's yard across the street. Charles, without noticing and still lost in thought, mumbling to himself about what Evelyn's surprise might be, walked down the sidewalk and right past Catherine, who was talking to Charles's new neighbor, Carol. She had just moved in and loved to garden. Trying to avoid the sun that would come up and make everything too hot, Carol had gotten up to plant some flowers in her new front yard. Catherine had noticed her when leaving Charles's house and stopped to introduce herself. Both loved gardening. They'd been chatting about it those few minutes before Charles walked out his door. As he walked by the two women, Catherine remembered the real reason she had wanted to talk to Carol. "What a sweet man," Carol said with a smile, watching him make his way further down the street, her eyebrows knit together as she recalled him walking home the evening before in the same suit. "Yeah, Charles is a good man." Charles is his name. What was he saying to himself? Something about Evelyn? Looking up from her spot in the dirt, Carol asked how Catherine knew her new neighbor. "Charles is my brother-in-law. He was married to my sister Evelyn for 54 years. "Was married?" Carol asked. "Evelyn passed away 3 years ago yesterday, actually. We were going to meet up to plan this surprise for Charles. The bus she rode, got into an accident." "Oh," Carol wasn't sure what to say. "I'm sorry. It must be so hard to lose a sister. It must be so hard to lose a wife. Where's Charles headed this morning?" "Probably to pick up some flowers for Evelyn," Catherine explained. "It is their 57th anniversary today." "Well, that's so sweet. He takes it to her grave?" Catherine let out a quiet sigh, wondering where to begin. "Actually, Charles doesn't know Evelyn is gone. I'm guessing he's going to pick up some flowers and bring them home as if Evelyn is waiting there to greet him when he gets back. He hasn't been to her gravesite since the funeral. It's just too hard to handle, I guess. So he chooses to forget." It was silent for a while between them, only the birds beginning to chirp, before Catherine continued to explain. "You see, Charles lives his life as if Evelyn was still here, and I've just stopped trying to explain it to him that she is gone because it's too much for him. The last time we had a conversation, he ended up in a mental hospital for several weeks." Carol, trying to wrap her head around everything, asked, "Well, maybe he should be somewhere where people can take care of him, right? I mean, to be living on his own in his condition, maybe it isn't safe." "Oh, Charles does okay. People at work know about his situation. They let him come in and help out with some stuff around the office. It's good to get him out of the house. I stop by every once in a while to help with things around the house and keep him fed. If it was up to him, the man would just sit and survive off grapefruits. I couldn't stand to see Charles in a home. Evelyn wouldn't want it. And so I watch out for him. I was just dropping by some meals when I saw you out here. I volunteered during the day across town, so I've usually gone by now. But I had to tell you about Charles." Carol, while being understanding, was looking a little nervous. "Listen," Catherine said. "Charles is going to be okay. I'm just wondering if you can keep an eye on him for me. He can take care of himself for the most part, but sometimes I just worry about him being on his own all the time. Does he get very lonely? Maybe I can visit him some days and just keep him company. To be honest, I'm not really sure how it works for Charles. There are times when he knows Evelyn isn't there. Whenever I'm with him, he seems to have some excuse where she is. But I suppose when he's on his own, he probably imagines that she's with him." Both were quiet for a while, looking down the road the way Charles had walked. Remembering she was already late for her volunteer job across town, Catherine turned to Carol and said, "You know, I bet Charles would love a visit every now and then. If you could do that, it would be just wonderful. Most days he just sits there and listens to his wedding song over and over again. I think it makes him sad even though his mind is keeping Evelyn alive. She wrote him a note the night she left, and he has left it sitting on the counter all this time, constantly reading it over and over. Some more real conversation would be good for him. I'm looking into selling my apartment across town and moving in, but I've been holding off knowing that it would be hard on Charles. Their home was a special place to them, and it would just be another reminder of reality. Anyways, here's my number. Catherine dug through her purse, trying to find a pen and something to write on. She scribbled her number on the back of an old flyer for a free car wash and handed it to Carol. The two women said goodbye and Catherine headed into her car parked across the street. Carol watched her go and thought about how much she now knew about the lives of these people that she had just met. She could tell by the look in Catherine's eyes, filled with tears that held on tight and refused to fall, how much it meant to her that she was willing to help. A couple blocks away, the sun was now filling the sky with a blinding light. Charles was almost to the flower shop. Again, he mumbled to himself, "I wonder what the surprise could be," as he opened the door, walking in and heading over to the clerk to ask for orange chrysanthemums. Hey, thanks for making it to the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. My past 14 weeks have been spent in a wonderful class, my first creative writing class. I enjoyed it a lot. And while being in this class, I got to meet a lot of other creative writers and people that are exploring this part of themselves. And in the course of this class, I had to read other people's work. And that's how I got to meet Whitney Harper. She's an English major that's still trying to figure out her place in this world and what to do with such a degree. I wish her the best of luck. But this story, Orange Chrysanthemums, stood out to me because it was full of heart and reminiscence. And I've reached the part of my life, I'm not that old, but I've reached a part of my life where I look back and I feel very reminiscent of really great times. And so, I hope that this story had something in it for you. Perhaps help you appreciate a loved one a little bit more, or perhaps to put a little more effort into a relationship. Whether or not you do, I just hope that you enjoyed the story, and I'm sure Whitney does too. Thank you so much. And hey, tell me what you thought about the story. Leave a comment below, subscribe, and don't forget, follow me on Instagram. I try to keep it real there. It's a lot of fun. And have a good day.